Hi guys, so you're gonna see my video, the rest of my video here in a minute. Um, but before we get into making the things with spiritual rice, I thought that we'd go over a couple of things. Um, why if I don't even remember because it was a couple days ago what I said in the video because I had my papers and I've moved things and lost my lost my papers and had to redo it. And to be honest with you, I forgot what I said when I was showing you about the powder. So forgive me if it's in there in there, and I'm just going to say it here. So forgive me. But I'm going to talk to you about making rice powder, because if you make it into a powder and you're using it outside, it is more ethical, because birds will eat the rice and the rice will expand and it can choke and suffocate birds. Um, so that's why I do it in a powder, especially if I'm needing to use it outside. You can combine this powder with cinnamon and do your whole first of the month ritual along with eggshell powder. I'm pretty sure I'll find my video on how to make that and on how to make eggshell chalk. I will find it and hopefully remember to find it and put it in the description. Um, you can combine it with that type of magic, implement it into your practice if you so choose. So, when it comes to the spiritual uses of rice, rice is often used for prosperity, fertility, good luck, um, purification, and protection. Um, in the more lighter witchcraft circles. Um, in some cultures, rice is often um, offered or given to deities, for sustenance, longe- longevity. I can't talk tonight. Um, uh, and People will often offer rice to their deities. That's mostly within the Hindu and Buddhist circle, although Buddhists will use rice to make their mandalas. Um, so, and they, I'll have to find a picture of a mandala. Uh, so they are, Buddhists will use rice in that manner. In other cultures, it is a means of protections against the haints and buhags, which are there. I'm sure there's another word for them. Um, so because when people would have bowls of rice by their bed or throughout their house, um, so because these two malevolent types of spirits, of course, they would have to count every single grain of rice. So they have to be back in their realm before sunup. So this was a means of keeping them distracted so that they did not cause night terrors or uh, situations around the house or invade you, um, or to cause any harm within the home. This is one of the means. If you look in like North Carolina, you'll see a lot of the porches and stuff painted what's called a haint blue. So I believe that's what the with that culture. Other spiritual uses for rice would be for purification. So like when you're washing your rice or cooking your rice, I mean, in some cultures they do drink rice water. Um, but in others it's used for purification and banishment. They would combine the rice water with milk and other herbs, and use those in purification rituals. Um, let's see what else. Uh, it can, in homes, it can get rid of negativity. Um, and during when weddings, back in the day, when couples would throw rice, they no longer do that because of the harm it causes to the birds. Now they just throw bird seed. It was a means of distraction, um, so that the evil spirits would go to the rice versus at the couple. It was also used as a means of bringing luck, prosperity, and joy to the newlywed couple as they were going off into their marriage. Um, it can also be used in, as I said, witches' balls and such. Um, in China, it is, or Asian cultures, it is prized. And using whole grains of rice in the Hindu tradition as a means for offerings. Um, Rice can also be put in, again, in charm bags, witches' balls, or um, talismans. Maybe adding some rice powder, a tiny amount of rice powder to, if you're making an evil eye, for example, or adding rice water to your floor wash along with your Florida water, or maybe adding it to your Florida water. Um, Now, like salt, how you can dye salt for different colors, because different color salts have different magical purposes. But there is a form of purple rice that grows naturally, and it is known as black rice. Um, and it does offer prosperity and protection. There are uses for burnt rice, although I've heard of it and I couldn't find anything about spiritual uses for burnt rice. But um, dyeing rice, adding different food coloring to rice, uh, rice does come yellow naturally, and that's for joy and success. Dyeing your rice red is for passion and strength and power. Dyeing your rice blue would be for things like peace. Dyeing your rice purple is for enhancing intuition, psychic ability, and it can also be used in binding magic. Green rice is often used in abundance and in prosperity. White rice is used in purification. Rice can also be used in baneful magic, such as sowing chaos, causing distractions, arguments, and it can absorb or slow protective energies. Um, it can also be used in breakup spells to cause situations. Um, So there you go, guys. There are some of the spiritual uses for rice. So let's get on with the rice powder. I forgot. I'm sorry. Um, the correspondences of rice can also be earth for grounding and intellect, and sometimes can be used for air. When it, I'm sorry, not grounding and stability for earth, and then sometimes it can be uh, an element of air when it comes to speed and intellect. Another use for rice when it comes to abundance, um, the dandelion, when it turns white, there was the story about if you would pick one of the white dandelions and blow on it, that they would grant your wish. um, at least that's what I was always told. It's, I guess, Irish folklore. But if you gather a bunch of the white seeds from the dandelion. Add a bit of rice to it, and it will strengthen any of your wishing spells as you blow your wish into the universe. Okay, guys, so I was going to try and do this video earlier. Somebody's at my butt. When, it was daylight and I could use natural light, but I had a lot to do today. So, one thing is, ethically, they stopped throwing rice at weddings and started throwing bird seed because as rice gets wet, it expands, and it was basically suffocating birds because it would get stuck in their throat, and it was unaliving birds. So if you're wanting to do any type of working outside, this is a way to do it ethically. Plus, if you do it this way, it's still rice and it goes a lot farther. You can make a lot more of it when you do it this way, even though, rice is pretty cheap, but you get more for your dollar if you simply just grind it into powder and use it for whatever you need to use it for. Personally, when I make some, I'm going to add it to some eggshell chalk. And of course, as you've seen when I went through the history of rice, that's something that you can do. And when I'm talking about black rice, I meant burnt rice for protection. I mean, you can color it black, but I don't. That's the only way I can think of. So when you're making rice powder, and this is how I do it. First off, start with small bits at a time. Don't do like a whole bunch at one time, because as that grain pops, and it can be messy. And work smarter, not harder. As minimal mess as you can, and then when you get it all ground, then you can just keep take your ground and just keep grinding it till it's the consistency that you want. But personally, I use just small amounts and grind it and add it to a bowl. Then when I've got my other bowl full, or my other jar or whatever, then I just redo it a couple times. But what I found that works is if you take, and I've got like a small amount of water here, and I'll just take it in my hand and just kind of drop it like this and get it a little bit wet. My mortar and pestle, I washed them so they're a little bit wet. You don't want a lot of water when you do this, but just enough so that the grains don't, the inner part of it doesn't pop, and you don't get a mess. I mean, I'm using some pretty fine green rice anyway, so I don't just dump like a whole thing in there. I mean, you kind of want to wash it anyway, and you just kind of leave it in here to set, for a few minutes, and it does get it a little softer, and it is like a lot easier to grind when you do it like that. It does stick to your hands, so anyway, so it sticks to your hands, and then you just grind it up until you get, this is going to be a little bit wet because I added a little bit more water than what I normally do, but that's how you do it. Of course, another thing that you can do that also, depending on the type of mortar and pestle, is if you kind of push down and twist, and you'll see and you'll hear like a pop as you do it this way. This is also like another way of doing it, but you know, like I said, it depends on the type of mortar and pestle you have. And to just sort of, you know, get it down to the bottom and do it this way is also because of the little hard piece in the rice, the little grain within the grain, I guess you want to say. But of course my mortar and pestle was wet, so I'm gonna have to, once I grind this, you can kind of see how it's just kind of breaking up into even smaller little pieces. Now that I've done this, it just makes it, because if you try to grind it dry, and as you apply the pressure, the rice is just going to pop out of your bowl, and you're just going to have it everywhere. I kind of got, you know, as you can see, that's kind of what happens, which is kind of like why you should, you know, only do small bits at a time. But, you know, don't grind it dry, because it's going to be a mess. And you're going to end up getting more rice in other places than what you do. And you're just going to end up wasting it. So, but just don't, I mean, I didn't take into account, because the last time I did this, I didn't use this particular mortar and pestle. So, it was already wet, because I washed it just to be, and cleansed it just to be on the safe side. Because the last time I used it, I made eggshell powder, and I didn't want, you know, any of the particles of the eggshells in there, so I scrubbed it and cleansed it really well. And if it's not, you know, like I said, once you have it and it's not fine enough, you just put everything back in and you grind it again, and it's going to take probably 3 or 4 times to get it down to a fine powder. But I'm going to have to set this outside. I mean, it's breaking up now, but I'm going to have to set this outside and let it kind of dry a little bit, and then regrind it. But, you know, it's not just the motion, counterclockwise or clockwise, depending on what you prefer. But, you know, I found that just applying pressure and twisting, and you'll see and you'll feel it kind of pop. But, you know, you don't want the rice going out of your bowl and you having it everywhere. And you know, rice is pretty cheap, but, you know, you don't want to waste that, you know, rice. Like, especially now with food prices the way they are. I mean, it's still a pretty cheap thing to use for your spell work, and, you know, adding food coloring to it depending on what you need it for. You don't necessarily have to grind it up if you don't want to, but like I said, when you do it this way, it can, I mean, it's still rice, but it'll go like a lot farther if you grind it. You're going to have more rice. And if you're wanting to leave it outside and you have it ground into a powder, you don't have to worry about the birds getting it and eating it, because they can't, you know, they can't get that, like the little hard part that's in the middle, you know, that's the part that, like right here, like that's the part that you want ground down. So if the birds do get a hold of it, it's not gonna, it's a bit more ethical to do it this way, especially if you are using rice outside, within whatever in your practice. And plus, if you grind it in powder and you're wanting to put it in like witch's balls, it's a bit easier than having to, you know, that, if you wanted to use it and things like that, it's a bit easier to get it into the ball if it's ground up. And like I said, I'm going to have to let this probably sit outside for the night to let it dry, and then, grind it again until it's, the fine powder that I want it. You don't have to have your powder as fine as what I'm going to make it. It's totally up to you how, you want to do it and what you use it for. But I tend to get stuff like this because I might have multiple uses, and I'll put it in a jar and such. Of course, clean your rice, and you can use that rice water for your spiritual baths. Plus, if you do grind it up fine enough, you can also maybe, if it's powder form, and add it to maybe your Himalayan salt for purification. See how that's becoming a powder? Grind it up with and add it with like your Himalayan salt or whatever. For your purification rituals with your bath, or just put it in a bag. I don't know, depending on how within your practice you do your spiritual baths and your purification. But I mainly do that so that I'm not hurting any birds. Plus, like I said, it's a bit more economical to grind it into a powder. Now see how that's ground into I'm going to have to do it a few more times, let it dry, and then do it a few more times. But it's slowly but surely, it does take a while. But see how now it's ground into a bit of got some on my hand, a bit of a finer powder, and you just keep doing that until it's, it's still a little hard, and but you just keep going until it's the consistency that you feel is comfortable. I like my stuff really fine, so I'm probably going to grind it a couple more times, but I think I need to let it dry. I used a little too much water, because I'm used to using, I'm not used to using rice that's as, smaller grained as this, and you can kind of feel like the little, the little pieces like that in it, and I don't like that, so that's kind of the stuff that I like ground down. But you grind that down fine enough, and you can use it in spiritual baths. And then the water that I had, because I kept getting it stuck to my hands, you can use that rice water for floor washes or spiritual baths or whatever you need to. Of course, you can grind, add food coloring to. Some people like the full grain when they do that. To jars for your altar or whatever. But, this is, primarily for like witches' balls, and to utilize like out in the doorway type of a situation. You can place a little bit of this maybe under your mat for purification if you have a doormat. Stuff like that, because it's fine. And then if you're one that's in the broom closet, nobody really knows what it is, but just sprinkle a little bit on your doormat and put it underneath your doormat, if you're going to go the purification route. And since that does kind of absorb negativity, and you grind it down far enough, and sprinkle it around on your floor. And you can, vacuum it up later, sweep it up later, out on your porch. And then, you just grind it down far enough, and you don't have to worry about the birds getting a hold of it, and hurting birds. But anyway, guys, yeah, I got some on my hands. So I'm just kind of letting this dry, kind of sifting it. I mean, that's a good fair amount. Gonna put it in a jar. But you know, just get a little bit each month to add to it. But I'm gonna let this dry out and grind it a couple more times. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed, and please like, comment, and subscribe. And please, peace, love, and light, and blessed be.